Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality Adventures. This is a non-judgmental place to explore spirituality, and we're so glad you're here. This is a viewer and listener-supported podcast, so we greatly appreciate your support. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure and like, share, and subscribe to any of the social media content platforms that you're using. And then if you go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, you can make a one-time donation, or with a monthly subscription, you'll gain access to our bonus content. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality Adventures. We're so glad you joined us today. And today I have the privilege of interviewing Reverend Paul Smith. Paul was pastor of Broadway Baptist Church down in Kansas City, 39th and Broadway. Right now, and I when I was a teenager, I used to go down to backwoods, because I was a big outdoorsman. And so that was right close to your church. And so as a teenager, I'd pass by. But then when I moved here in 1990 to start Vineyard Church, I was visiting churches all around because I wasn't doing a Sunday service yet, right? And I would pop in at Broadway in the early 90s because you guys did great worship. And I remember that you and Andy Cullen were popping around at Vineyard conferences back in the early 90s, right? I think you maybe had gone to more Vineyard conferences than I had. And so anyway, I that's when I first came in, and I would, I'd read your stuff, and we'd bump into each other at Midwestern Library, sometimes. And then kind of have, we weren't close friends, but just kind of tracked with you over your spiritual journey. And we've touched base a few times in there. And so you've been a long time, 50 years of ministry in Kansas City, right?
49 years at Broadway, right?
Broadway, yeah. So one of the longest tenured pastors in Kansas City. Yeah. I went almost 30 years at Vineyard, and even at 30, you end up being one of the longest tenured pastors, right? There's a lot of turnover, and there's not many people that stick out one church for 30, 40, 50 years in America, So thank you for all the ministry that you've done in Kansas City. You've been one of the faith leaders of our community.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Paul, a lot of people listening won't know your story probably, but I would like to get into it a little bit, like at least give us a, 15, 20 minute overview, like where were you born?
Sure.
How did particularly your spiritual journey, what kind of church did you grow up in? How did you end up feeling called into ministry? How did you end up at Broadway Baptist, that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I was born and raised in St. Louis. I was a Southern Baptist before I was born. My pregnant mother enrolled me in the nursery of her Southern Baptist church. So I started off pretty conservative.
Yes.
But it was a moderate church, and I am forever grateful to it because it introduced me to Jesus, whom I find fascinating. And I remember when I was 12, I asked my Sunday school teacher, I said, how come all this stuff we read about in the Bible, how come none of it happens here? And by stuff, I meant the mystical stuff. I didn't have a word for it then.
Okay.
And I think John Wimmer used to call it the stuff, too.
Yeah, doing the stuff.
Yeah.
That was one of his famous lines.
That's right. So
when do we get to do the stuff?
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's what I was asking when I was 12. Yeah. He said, I don't know. Go ask the preacher. So I went and asked him, and he said, well, I don't know either. I went to seminary, and they didn't help much either. So, but I had this inner appetite or longing for a mystical reality, especially to know Jesus in some real way rather than just reading about him. And I was already a phenomenologist. I read the Bible for the phenomenon, not for the doctrines.
Interesting.
And
even at 12.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
interesting.
And it is, yeah, because I was interested in what people experienced.
Yeah.
So I was really religious. I was the president of my high school Bible club throughout all 4 years of high school. Uh, I carried my Bible on top of my books. Played the violin in the school orchestra. I was the concert master, and between those two things, that made me a real nerd. Uh,
Yeah.
but I
You weren't
was
an athlete at all. You
no, no,
okay?
no.
Just a book nerd
I
and a
was
music nerd. Okay.
yeah. I read voraciously back then, too, and so I was very active in my church, and was kind of at 18 was sort of the leader of my youth group, and then let's see, I guess when I was 19, uh, a local church in St. Louis, asked me to be their choir master organist. So that's one of the churches where the organ's in the middle, the choir's around you, and you play the organ with one hand and 2 feet and wave your hand at the organ,
Yeah.
the choir. And I did that, and then um, uh, eventually then went to seminary when I finished Washington University.
You went to Washington University,
Yes,
did a
yeah,
bachelor's there.
yeah,
What
yeah.
did you major in?
I had a full scholarship. Well, the smart kids in my senior year at high school went into engineering, so that's what I did. And second
Huh.
year, I was crawling around a tank at Mallinckrodt Chemical Company on the top of it one day at a class, and I thought, what am I doing up here? And I don't like this. Is not fun at all. So I changed my major to psychology and dumped all that calculus and physics and stuff, which I found fascinating. And then when I finished up college, I heard a radio commentator say, "You should do when it comes to an occupation, you should do what you love to do." And I asked myself, "What do I love to do?" And what as a 18-year-old, what I loved to do was see people get along in their spiritual life,
Hmm.
come alive.
Yeah.
And that was my quote call to the ministry, because I think everybody's called to the ministry. So I
Hmm.
don't let people call me reverend and or the minister. And so
Yeah.
anyway, that's when I came to Kansas City, where I am now, or where we are now,
Yeah. Which
and
seminary did you go to?
Midwestern Seminary, the Baptist.
Okay. Who
Yeah, I
was the
was.
president there when you went?
Oh, I don't remember his
Was it
name.
what year did you start there? Was it
55,
Oh wow.
57. Uh, Millard Berquist was the president.
Okay. Okay.
It was a long time ago. It was in the
Yeah,
middle of
yeah.
the L8 controversies.
Okay.
Yeah, but that was seminary was fun. I got to look at things I was interested in, but I still didn't find the mystical that I was looking for. And when I when
What
I
year did
finished
you go? What year did you go to Broadway Baptist?
1963,
Was that right out of seminary?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
actually, yeah, right out of seminary, and they called me as an associate pastor,
Okay.
and but soon the pastor left, and I became the quote senior pastor,
Right.
uh, and I loved working there. I, I my belief is that most pastors give up their spiritual growth and become cautious in order to keep their job at their church. They don't allow themselves to explore spiritually because they'll lose their congregation. I was fortunate enough to have a congregation that if I learned something new, well, for instance, one of the first things I looked around and saw that all the deacons were men and we didn't ordain women. I thought there's something wrong with that, and so I taught about that the women are part of all this, and we started ordaining women and began having women pastors, and so that allowed me to stay at the church. I looked at our worship language. It began to bother me that we only spoke of God in male terms and images, and so the first book I wrote was called "Is It Okay to Call God Mother?" Considering the feminine face of God, and I wrote it for my congregation because I wanted them to change their minds about God, that it was okay for me to talk about God, her, and she, and mother.
Yeah.
And I knew that would be a shock if I just started doing that. Being a Baptist church, I decided I needed to convince the congregation, so I taught about it for a year, and at the end they voted, and they voted to rewrite all of our hymns and use inclusive or gender-neutral language, including Christmas hymns, which was a brutal task.
Interesting.
Yeah, and
Wow.
so we began having that in our worship service, and everybody was fine with it. So once again, the church was willing to follow along with me,
That's
so I didn't
interesting.
need to go somewhere.
Yeah, that's so unusual. It's so unusual, right?
Yeah,
Because if I remember, like when I first visited Broadway in the early 90s, you had a bunch of pamphlets on like charismatic kind of things,
yeah,
like speaking in tongues and
yeah.
prophecy and this and that and the other. And so and I was starting a Vineyard Church, and I was coming out of the Southern Baptist world. I went to Baylor and I went to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and then moved to Kansas City and started a Vineyard. So I was thinking, oh, Paul's, a Vineyard guy that's Baptist, but then I remember when you went into the Mother God stuff, I was like, because I wasn't, I
Sure.
thought, well, there's got to be a feminine side of God. He created male and female and all that kind of stuff, but
Yes, she did.
yeah. And women, and I was actually for women in ministry as well. Right. So I was with you pretty much right there, so, but then you went from the mother, the feminine side of God to, you kept going and kept going and kept going.
Kept going.
Like you kept showing your congregation new growth opportunities. How's that?
That's a good way of saying it. Every 2 or 3 years, there was a major change, and coming into our version of third wave charismatic practice was a part of that. That's when I visited Wimber conferences, and that was my first taste of. I saw people having mystical experiences.
Right.
That was terrific, and that I love that. And except I didn't have many myself. People prayed for me a million times, and nothing ever happened because I drive with my brakes on. And but anyway, I brought it back to the church and took people with me to hear Bob Mumford and Derek Prince and all those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And so that the church moved into that. We didn't vote on that. That just happened. And people's spiritual lives began deepening. And our worship service, instead of when you get in the church, sit still and be quiet, it was move around and make some noise. And so the congregation began, we got an orchestra and clapping our hands. I love that music. I miss it greatly. So that was another movement that we had.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also early on gave up believing in hell. Gehenna, the word that is translated as hell in the Bible, was the name of the town garbage dump and outside of Jerusalem. And it's Jesus said, where the fire is never quenched and the worm never dies," and that was true. For many centuries ago, it was where they did child sacrifice, and it was now the town garbage dump. And he used that as a reference, but he used it as a reference for people who mistreat the poor and the needy and the oppressed, the little ones, and never about what you believed or whether you followed him or not. So
Isn't that the truth, though?
Yeah, that's right. He was an early guy for social justice and for how we treat the oppressed and the poor, and it had nothing ever to do with your belief system or with following him, whether you're a Christian or not. But we skipped that part, and
I know. That's how I see it now, 100%. But I was raised in that evangelical perspective,
right.
you know.
It's a toxic. Belief in hell is a toxic belief, because people become Christians not because they want to be, but because they're afraid not to be, and that is a really awful reason to fall in love with Jesus and to become a Christian.
Well, and just an image of God who would, like, torture somebody for all eternity. Right. It's just holy crud,
toxic image.
Yeah.
And pretty soon I realized that Jesus read the Bible differently than I was taught to.
You're right.
He ignored some parts, he embraced some parts, and he rejected some parts.
Yes.
And
he was a midrashic radical rabbi who
that's right.
had subversive interpretations of Torah, dissonant interpretations of Torah, new interpretations of Torah, and left out all the other crap, right?
He left out the angry God stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And rejected it because it was toxic then.
Yes.
Toxic today.
Yes.
And so that's a biggie, to get rid of a judging God, a judging Jesus, and any kind of eternal hell. I have a picture on my website of the town garbage dump that is outside of Jerusalem. It's now a beautiful park. So much so I don't know what happened to all the fires, but they went out. So hell is all cleaned up now.
Yeah. So Styx is a garden now.
Yes, it is.
Mythical Styx is a garden now, right?
That's right. So anyway, there was another thing that the congregation went along. They were only too happy to get rid of hell by that time. And they went along with me. And once again, I would have not been able to be in a church that taught hellfire and brimstone, or that had a plan of salvation about Jesus dying for your sins to appease the wrathful God. So they changed, so I could stay there and keep working with them, and it was lovely.
Yeah. Can I ask you a quick question on that, real quick? Because I've thought about I agree with you 100% on God's a loving. For me, God is love, and radical love and self-giving love. I've thought about this issue of anger. Does love ever get angry? If you're thinking about and I don't want to get too deep in this. I've seen I remember one day a mother, her little kid was playing out on my street, and a car went flying by in a 25 at about 50. And she just she almost ran the car down, and she was so angry, right? Why? Because, yeah. And so it seems like there's some place for righteous anger, you know what I'm saying? But it's not about self-righteousness. It's more about the things that hurt us, or things that hurt people, the things that destroy love and relationship. And the anger has to be redemptive in some, I don't know. I know you've thought about this 1,000 times.
Yeah, I think God gets sad when
sad is a good,
when she sees all that. She's sad, and her heart is broken. And but But I think God is not a controlling God. So love prohibits God from interfering with all that, and instead God says, "Okay, you guys need to change. If you want to get rid of oppressive hell and oppressive people and ecological damage and all other stuff, you got to do it. I'll inspire you to do it, but I'm not going to control evil in the world
Mm.
to let you escape it." So I believe in the uncontrolling love of
Yeah.
God.
Maybe even a God that partners with us in some way.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I
Yeah.
believe we're co-creators with God.
Co-creators. Yeah.
And God's part in the co-creation is to inspire and to motivate and to guide. Our part is to look at the mountain and not say, "God, would you move that mountain?" Our part is to look at the mountain and say, "Mountain, move." And we get it done.
Yeah.
It's like people who say, "Oh, God, make it rain. Oh, God, keep it from raining." And God says, "Well, you guys stop messing up the earth and fouling your nest, and it'll go back to normal." So that's us. The co-creation is that God guides us, but God doesn't do we're the only physical hearts and minds and hands and feet of God in the world. So we have to do the work.
Mm.
The creating. God does the inspiring and visioning for the
Yeah.
creating.
You know, when I went through my big meltdown a few years ago, and I questioned everything I'd ever believed, and then I tried to figure, but I couldn't be an atheist, even though I thought hard about it. but I wasn't, and I wasn't at heart. And so then I tried to start thinking, well, okay, so what parts of God that I've believed in do I need to hang on to? And, what parts should I dismiss? Right. And kind of what's interesting is I remember when I was 18 and 19 at Baylor, I was reading process theologians like Charles Hartshorne and, Whitehead. And I remember then thinking, like, that's interesting, a God who evolves, and it kind of did away with some of the classical Greek categories of perfection and immutability and, omnipotence and omniscience and all that. And it was intriguing to me, but I had just been saved kind of thing. And, had kind of felt sure that I had had a really powerful experience. So I ended up kind of leaning more toward the guys like N.T. Wright or something like that, who are pretty conservative, but really smart,
Yes.
well thought. They thought deeply about things. And so I ended up kind of gravitating that way. But now I'm revisiting I'm going back and rereading my Hartshorne and my Whitehead,
Sure.
Anyway,
that's great.
But that their thoughts on God would kind of fit well with some of the things you just expressed. That's what made me think of that.
Yes, and you went through your deconstruction period, which is absolutely necessary. So good for you. And then you're reconstructing. Yeah.
Right. So you took the church through all kinds of transitions. They stuck with you, which is miraculous.
Yes.
So you must have had some great people. Surely, I know you probably lost a few and won a few and lost a few and won a few. Your congregation was ever evolving, just as you were ever evolving, right?
We always lost some people. When we started calling God Mother, we had a few men left the church saying, "Nobody's going to tell my wife I'm not in charge at home." And the toughest thing was when the gays asked me. We had a don't ask, don't tell policy. They said, "Paul, you've changed your mind about everything else in the Bible. Will you change your mind about us and admit that God made us the way we are and loves us the way we are?" And I said, "Okay, I will." And so I did, and totally changed my mind. I realized I'd been totally wrong. The Bible does not say anything. It didn't even have a word for homosexuality. And the sin of Sodom was oppressing the needy and the oppressed and the weak. So
what's your conclusion on Romans 1?
That's temple prostitution.
Yeah, that's what I think too. Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and there was no concept of orientation back then. So that's I mean the Romans when Jesus healed the Roman servant, the Roman guard servant. The word used there is the same word they used for the Romans' sexual servant. So
Mm.
Jesus, Jesus had a Roman soldier who was having sex with his servant, and
Hmm.
Jesus healed it and didn't say anything about the sex.
Hmm.
So, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
that was the hardest. And at that point, there was a guy who he people would always come to the church and be enamored of me and expect me to become their best friend and pal around with them. And when I didn't have time to do that, they would get mad at me. So there was a guy that it had happened to, and he left the church. And then when we started talking about the gay issue, we had Tony Campolo's wife to come and give a talk about pro-gay, and some guy from St. Louis about anti-gay. We discussed it for a year or two,
Okay.
and it was really difficult. But this guy decided to join the church again and lead a movement to fire me.
Yeah.
And he and he had a point, which was after 49 years of changes every 2 or 3 years, people were tired of the changes because the
Mm.
changes always came with some price and some
Hmm.
controversy, and
Right.
this was a big one.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a big one. So
It's interesting that Tony Campolo's wife was ahead of him on that issue, right?
yes, she was. Yeah, we had Tony as a speaker, but yeah, he was behind the curve right there on that.
Uh-huh.
So eventually uh, the, this guy and got a bunch of people together to pray for the church, and eventually moved to fire. We had a staff of 8 pastors to fire me and 3 others, and they almost fired us. There was that many people who were kind of tired of the discussion,
Yeah.
and so they left. All those people left the church, so
Yeah.
we were cut in half, and that was demoralizing. And so that was difficult, but it was interesting because that was about the same time that I readied them for the biggest change, which was they had a gay pastor.
Right.
And when I came out to my wife, I said I at age 60 with 2 kids and 33 years of marriage, and I said I think I'm gay. Her response was, "Well, that's a relief." I think she knew a long time ago there was something wrong. I
Yeah.
we didn't have 2 kids by a virgin birth, but it was close. And
Hey, can I ask you a question about
yeah,
because I was always welcoming to the LGBTQ community at my church and would even spend time listening to their stories, gained a great amount of compassion, but was still kind of struggling with some of my conservative theology, right? And but almost all the people that and it's been 100 now, over 30, 40 years, but lots of interviews. But most everybody that I knew felt the confliction of their sexual identity at very, very young ages. Were you that way as well when you think back? Would you say your orientation, you were aware of it at a young age, or were you so indoctrinated in your conservative beliefs that you didn't even pursue it? You had enough self-discipline.
well, I was more than indoctrinated. I was emotionally repressed.
Yeah.
And so I led with my head. I was the smartest guy in high school, and not with my heart. If I led with my heart would say, boy, those hot guys are really attractive. I was not aware of those impulses. I had them at times and could look back and see I kind of liked looking at certain guys. But I was so repressed. There's no way I could have
Okay.
labeled that or been aware of that. So that came as a gradual awareness over a year's time. But I was, almost 60, so that was really late. So I was really repressed. I also been in therapy for 20 years, but that hadn't uncovered that. I
Wow.
was successfully hiding.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, yeah,
Wow. That's a
yeah.
lot of discipline, a lot of repression.
Well,
Wow.
I'm a very disciplined person,
Yeah.
and I live life. When I all I had was a head, I lived it very intellectually and smart.
Yeah.
And now I've got a heart, and I'm trying to catch up.
Right.
And so it's been something. So anyway, like I said earlier, when I when I came out to my wife, she said that the kids were fine, the church was fine, and and the other pastors were fine. That's when they wrote me a letter that said Paul's got a right to a private life, meaning I was probably not going to be celibate until I found a partner. And anyway, I love going to the gay bars. I never hung around sinners before in my life. I mean, there were, Baptists, aren't sinners because they really work hard not being sinners. But when I started going to the gay bar, it was real sinners, and they were really fun. I just loved that.
Did you hang out at Missy B's?
Oh yeah, Missy B's and the Dixie Belle, and I met my partner at the Dixie Belle,
Oh, wow.
and so that was a wonderful time in my life. But in the meantime, the church was when a church loses almost half its members, it's not going to recover, and my time was ending there, and so I soon retired, and the church is now very small. It's about a dozen members, and
They still meeting in that big,
they
beautiful facility?
they sold the building. The building is now just been. In fact, went to the planning commission to tell them I approved. A developer has bought the building, and he's renovating it, both for any church services on Sunday morning and for weddings. And he's made the Sunday school rooms into hotel rooms, so that brides and grooms and the guests can stay at the hotel at the church.
Oh, wow.
It's a
Oh, man.
great way to
Interesting.
preserve a beautiful historic building.
Yeah, you bet.
So I love that.
Huh.
But anyway, the church is nearly dead. And of course they couldn't, they well, I won't say anything bad about, but they reverted to spelling God with two O's, and they traded in mysticism for social justice. So good for
Okay.
them for that.
Yeah.
But I think we need both, because we don't know the right thing to do unless we're mystics, and then
Hmm.
God says do it here and do it this way, and then our social action has great power and impact.
Hmm.
So anyway, that was sad to see, and I didn't know what I was going to do then. We're nearing the end. Okay,
All right.
so I wandered around for a few years, and then a guy called me up, a 35-year-old guy who had just moved back to Kansas City. He was a leader starting various groups and so on. And we had lunch, and we were soulmates. Just there was instant connection. He's a straight guy, married, got two kids, and I've never been able to be with anybody that I had such a soulmate connection. And we meet every week. We've been meeting every week for four years. We talk for an hour and a half, and then we meditate for a half hour, and have these incredible mystical experiences together. And out of that relationship came what I'm doing now, which is the Integral Christian Network. We decided we loved what we had so much, we decided to offer it. We thought it'd be great to have a community of people who are experiencing what we're experiencing.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing now.
Yeah. So because I want to get to a couple of things before we run out of time, but I wanted to show the audience, first of all, I've read your book called Integral Christianity. And I want to ask you about a couple of things in this book. And then the second book that I read of yours is Your God Big Enough, Close Enough, You Enough? And also, so fascinating, Richard Rohr, one of the guys that's been one of my favorites the last 3 years, and Ken Wilber. And Ken, I read Religion of Tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. Great.
Yeah. But what's interesting, Paul, is you might not remember this, but I would guess maybe 6 or 7 years ago, you called me, and I was pastoring Vineyard, and I think at the time your daughter and granddaughter were going to my church. Did you remember? Did she?
I didn't know. I didn't remember it was your church.
Yeah.
I seldom went to church, so you must have been very attractive.
Well, at any rate, but you called me, and you and Andy wanted to have lunch with me, and you were kind of interviewing me as a Vineyard pastor, and you were trying to, talk about all the different streams of Christianity. And I think you summarized my story with orthodoxy with grace and gifts or something like that.
Oh yeah. Yes.
And
right.
And then, but I remember I asked you about, meeting Ivan, your partner.
Yeah.
And I asked you about how you fell in love and all this kind of stuff. And I think you told me at the time that I was like one of the first evangelical pastors that asked you about your love story.
That's right. You were a rare bird.
So I thought that was interesting. But at any rate, I remember at that meeting, this was 7 years ago, you encouraged me to look into Ken Wilber. And I did, but I just don't think I was quite ready for him yet, And then, but now with all that I've gone through, he's been fascinating to read and stuff. So I wanted to say that because now I have read some Ken Wilber, and talk about how Ken had influenced the writing of Integral Christianity. Maybe give us just a couple of minutes on that.
Yeah, I found that it was easy for me to translate Ken into the Christian faith, the Christian path. And I thought one of the most spectacular understandings he came up with, what he calls the 1, 2, 3 of Spirit, which is the three faces of Spirit, which is the perspective of impersonal, of personal, and of intersubjective. And that just, when I translated that to God, it's like, oh my God. That's what I've been looking for all my life. I traded in the classical Trinity, which is very limiting, for the three faces of Spirit, which is the infinite face of God beyond us. That's Moses and the I am, Paul saying, in whom we live and move and have our being. The infinite face of God beside us, which is Jesus and other presences of God, including what Thomas Merton calls our four-footed saints, animals, and others, and spiritual beings. And then the inner face of God being us, which is our own divinity, which the Eastern Orthodox Church likes the idea of deification. And of course, evangelicals think we're really heretics to think that we would be, when Jesus said, "You're gods" to the Pharisees, I think he meant it. and of course he owned his divinity and set the model for his light, saying we're the light of the world too, for us to own our divinity. So that has been just a marvelous. Well, I wrote those 2 books about it,
Right.
and that so impressed me how that takes a very limiting idea of Trinity, which is male-oriented, very closed, and opens it up to a God who's big enough, who's close enough, and who's us enough.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I think it's transformed.
I really liked the way you expressed that. I think the hardest one, me being evangelical for, a good portion of my life is the you enough one, right? That's the one that evangelicals and I think even monotheists in general would have maybe the hardest struggle with, right? I did a paper, I was working on a second doctorate in the Hebrew Bible, and I did a really in-depth exegesis of just the image of God in Genesis, 1, 27, 28. And I did I checked out all of the ancient Near Eastern uses of that term, both those terms, the image and likeness.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's classically used for the kings, and they were the divine image of the God that they worshipped. And, it was an elitist term in almost every place I found it in all of the ancient Near East, except I found one spot in the Egyptian stuff that used the image of God in a democratic way. But then this passage in Hebrews 1 is like really the premier use of the image of God democratically.
Yep.
Not just for kings, but for everybody.
That's right.
For male and female, right? And so in some sense, it is the divinity of humanity.
Yep.
And it's not elitist.
No.
And, I remember I used to say, God's God and you're not, that little thing.
Yeah.
But I've kind of even rethought about that. It's like, even if you see the divinity of humanity, it's not like I express, and you might disagree with me and feel free to, but it's not like I'm the full expression of all that is divine, but I certainly am an aspect of it or a spark of it and can be interconnected to it. Right.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. That's where the 3 phases helps that out.
Yeah.
That we're not the infinite God.
Yeah.
Who's awesome. Although Thomas Bentley Hart, who's a Eastern Orthodox theologian, his new book is called You Are Gods. He takes 500 pages and says again and again, no, we really are infinite beings on the inside.
Well, and I think in one of your books, you pointed out how C.S. Lewis kind of flirted with that a little bit, right?
Yeah. So, but that all balances out when we have a relationship with Jesus, whom we see as our model and our guide. So and you don't own your own divinity by being egotistical.
Right.
That chases it away. And it's only by losing your ego you get in touch with your true self, which is your divine self. So there's not going to be egotistical, godlike people running around.
Right.
That are truly mystically owning their divinity.
And that what you just said, I really like that. And how does that? Maybe this is going to be maybe too big of a question, but how does that tie into that statement that you just made about your true self and losing your ego, then to find and discover your true self? It ties into a little bit about spiral dynamics, which you bring in your book, and it brings in a little bit of the shadow work too that you mentioned in your book. Can you comment on spiral dynamics and shadow work briefly? Because we're running out of time, but and then I want to get to your meditation stuff, so you can kind of frame it up a little bit.
Spiral dynamics is a good system. I think it leaves out the mystical that Ken majors in, and so that's I favor the integral system of stages of evolution, and but spiral dynamics is offered to a lot of people, and that's fine.
Say again, what do you prefer?
I prefer the integral idea of the stages of growth, the archaic, well, also Gebser's deal, which
Okay.
is
Yep. Yep.
archaic, traditional, warrior, uh, traditional, modern, postmodern, integral. Those, I think those are. But that's Steve McIntosh's framing too. I think that's
Right.
a
And
more
that's who you
acceptable.
reference. I'm looking
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
diagram right here
yeah,
that's in the book here. Yeah.
yeah. Got that from him.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. And then what about the shadow work? Because you were a big inner healing fan,
Yeah.
and then you read Wilber on shadow work. How do you see those two related or different or?
Well, inner healing is a way to deal with our shadow, and ran around with Ruth Stapleton, who was President Carter's sister, who fostered inner healing globally, and
And didn't
we
you
did a
know
lot.
Francis McNutt too?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Francis was a good friend. We had him at the church many times,
Yeah. And he was
and
such a beautiful spirit, you know?
he was wonderful.
Yeah.
We
Wimber was really influenced by him as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he was a great guy. And we did monthly healing services at the church, and I would pray for people, and most of them would rest in the spirit. The same thing that happened when Francis would pray.
Yeah.
Interesting enough, I never did myself because I'm so unspontaneous. But the shadow work is important. Therapy can help take care of that. The 3-2-1 practice of two chair work is what I did in therapy, where you put whoever you're mad at in the chair, you talk to them, you describe them, you talk to them, and then you become them. And then in becoming them, you realize you're talking to yourself, your own
Mm,
shadow. And we that's a very important thing. And in addition, the golden shadow is very important. We repress not only our dark side, we repress our golden side. And one of the primary things we do in integral prayer in our we-space groups is we move into the altered state of consciousness in our prayer times, and then we reflect to one another what charismatics would call prophecy, only it's an integral version, and we see people's golden shadow. We see how they shine. We tell them that they don't believe it, but you hear it often enough, you begin to be transformed by it.
mm.
It's a very powerful way of dealing with golden shadow, and we have a lot of therapists that deal with the shadow work, and that's an important thing.
Yeah. So let's just the rest. We got a few minutes left here. Let's talk about because I remember when we talked last, you described to me what you're doing with the meditation
Yeah.
style that you've adopted. Maybe describe that to us and the work that you're doing with, like, if people are interested, how would they connect with what you're doing online?
Yeah,
Where would they go? And
they'd go to integralchristiannetwork.org.
integralchristiannetwork.org.
And they'll get it
Okay.
all there. Yeah, of course, everything we do is in reaction to something else. So I looked at the meditation systems, contemplative prayer, they all were very head oriented. They were top heavy, and some of them would move to heart space. But so I researched what it would look like to have a meditation system that involved the head, but also involved the heart, involved the gut, or in Japanese terminology, the head, heart, and hara, and also the feet in grounding. And I found lots and lots of resources there, and I put them all together in what we call whole body mystical awakening. And in our meditative practice, we help people begin by breathing, and then we help them move down from their head to their heart space. And when people move into the heart space, they tap into love that they didn't know was there. And when you're in your heart space and you're feeling love, that's the way God feels in our heart, because God's love, and the interface of God feels like love. So it's a transforming experience to move to your heart space. We started a new group last night, and when people move into their heart space, they just started crying. They discovered all this love that's in them. Everybody has it, even if it's all bent out of shape. Mm-hmm. And then we help people move into their gut, which we call spiritual womb, because everybody's got a spiritual womb, whether you got a physical one or not, which is the part of us that's creative. It's a part of our divine identity, and it's a part of spiritual knowing. That when you put your awareness there, you become aware of things that you weren't aware of before. And then we emphasize grounding, which means you get your feet grounded. You see yourself connected to the earth, to the whole cosmos. It's what the cosmotheandric vision. Ramon Panikkar, who's one of my favorite theologians, calls that there's the human, the divine, and the material reality. All three of those realities are part of our spiritual experience. And so we experience them when we move into head, heart, gut, and feet. And you spend 20 minutes doing that, and people end up in a different state of awareness. They are seeing things they hadn't seen before. We call it spiritual knowing. They have an awareness, and they're changed. And people do that every day, or with their WeSpace groups and other practices. I've been doing it for 4 years, and I still haven't plumbed the depths of it. And we've recorded our meditation practices. You can do a meditation with listening to me or Luke or other people on our website.
Okay. So I'm very much a novice at this. I've been in a meditation, like an in-person meditation group for the last year and a half or so. We did it on Zoom for a while, and then we got out of Zoom mode. But and the gal that does my meditation group trained with Sarah Brock and Jack Kornfield.
Yeah.
And I'm doing some training with them now as well. But so I'm a novice at all this stuff. But in Reiki, you have these chakras, they call, or these energy centers, and it's head, and it's the throat, the heart, the gut.
We approximate them,
the womb, or and then
many systems for chakras.
Okay,
we approximate them and get them into 4.
You get them, so you're kind of drawing off of that tradition a little bit.
Yeah, but they have a physical location that is so pronounced anybody can get in touch with it. It doesn't take a lot of training.
Yeah. So, and why do you tell me again? If you said it already, tell me again a different way, maybe. But why are those? You have 4 of those energy centers. Why is that so important in the meditation process?
Okay, there's a California Institute of Integral Studies in their graduate school program has their graduate students lay on the floor, and they have an instructor touch them in these 4 centers, and they call them centers of spiritual knowing. And it's very transformative. And we've adopted their practice and their research on that. A lot of research papers go on that. And I'm a phenomenologist. And so when people get in touch with the phenomenon that occurs when you center in your heart space, your gut space, your feet space, and then your head space. If you do the other three, then you move to your head. Your head is usually then very still and quiet. You don't have to work at getting it quiet, and then you can move from there on out to transcendence if you want to. And we found that the average person can begin a meditation practice right off the bat without having to go through the angst of getting quiet and not having a busy mind and all that other stuff. It's a very practical way of doing it, which has now research that shows that.
And that's the California
Institute of Integral Studies.
California Institute of Integral Studies. Is that something that Wilbur started, or is that something?
Integral started it. Jorge Ferrer, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Only because you referred him to me, the participatory turn and stuff like that.
That's it. It's a very academic book, but I love it.
Yeah.
He was the professor that started this graduate program. He's no longer there, but it's still going on.
Yeah. I have a very busy mind. I think that's why I was an insomniac for 30 years. Yeah. And probably an overactive amygdala. And so that's why, and the science behind meditation is so strong, right?
Yes.
Like
right.
it's good for you.
It changes your brain and changes your brain waves.
Yeah. I was just talking to a guy recently that is doing his psychology degree, and he's working on biofeedback and meditation. And he said there's even a new little thing you can get and put on your head and ties in with an app on your phone. And
I've got it.
What's it called?
It's called Muse.
Muse. That's what he told me.
And
does it help?
Oh, well, it instantly reads whether your heart is connecting with your head or not. And when your heart connects with your head, you move into coherence. And that's when you're in your heart space.
So I should get that.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll find out. I've been missing my heart space for years.
Well, and that's where you want to start, because that's the way to get out of your head. Get into your heart, which is full. You have a big heart. It's full of wonderful feelings. And then get into your gut and get into your feet. And then when you go to your head, it'll be all quiet.
Yeah. Okay. Muse. M-U-S-E.
Yeah.
Was that who developed that? Do you know?
No, I don't know.
Okay. I'm just curious. Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. Well, this is kind of a whole new world for me, Paul.
Well, you're good at new worlds. You've been doing new worlds for a long time.
I've been trying, But at any rate, well, that's wonderful. I'm so thankful that you took time out of your schedule to hang out and talk.
My pleasure. It's been fun. You're a great interviewer.
Well, that was really fun. I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I finally got an invite to you. So, but do you still see Andy Cullen every now and then, or talk, or
we occasionally
text a little bit,
email or talk?
Yeah,
he's busy being retired.
Okay.
So our days of traveling to California for a WIMBR conference.
Well, I was just gonna say, if you bumped into him, tell him I said hello, because I've always loved Andy so much. He's a good man.
Great guy.
Well, one of these days I got to meet Ivan.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He does not. When we first got together, I said, "Did you want to meditate with me?" He lasted 2 minutes. So he doesn't do all that, but he loves Jesus, and he has his spirituality, and he sort of tries to keep up with mine. I don't mean that in a superior way.
Yeah,
but it's just not his thing.
How are your grandkids doing?
They are both dead. Oh, excuse me, my kids are dead. My daughter died 6 years ago of colon cancer, and my son died 4 years ago of alcohol poisoning. But I have 3 grandkids, and they're great. And my granddaughter, Dolby, who came with her mom to your church, she's just a joy. We spend a lot of time together.
How old is she?
She's 22 now.
Yeah. How old are your other grandkids?
18 and 19.
Okay. Wow. Well, that's a blessing.
Yeah, they are.
That's a blessing. Well, again, thank you so much for doing our interview. Thank you as well for all the ministry that you have done in Kansas City through all these years. And thanks for being kind to me through these last few years that I've gone through. I appreciate it.
Well, I think you're refreshing and wonderful, and what you're doing now is a wonderful ministry. May it prosper, and bless you. It needs to bless you too. Yeah. All right.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for joining us at Spirituality Adventures, and we'll see you next time. This concludes today's episode. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Remember to like, share, or subscribe to the social media platform that you're using. And then go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, and make a one-time donation, or you can subscribe monthly and receive our special bonus content. Thanks so much.